Welcome to episode 149 of Silver Lining for Learning. I am very excited about tonight's episode because it's about human-centered engineering for learning. And this is a subject near and dear to my own heart. In 2019, I co-edited a book on learning engineering with Bror Saxberg, who is one of the pioneers in this movement. And then in the last year, the Learning Engineering Toolkit came out, which is a wonderful book and a real advance in the field. And I encourage you to take a look at it, especially after we explain learning engineering in this episode. But I think it's a very important advance, and I'm delighted today to have three guests who are really at the heart of this initiative. So Janet Kolodner from Boston College, Jim Goodell from Quality Information Partners, and Schatz from Knowledge Forge. I am going to ask Janet to introduce herself first because she comes out of the learning sciences, and we know that engineering is based on science. And then Jim, because he really is in the heart of the sort of engineering methods part. And then Say, because she has championed the use of this and other advanced methods for the entire Department of Defense and has been a big advocate for it. So Janet, tell us a little about yourself and why you're excited about learning engineering.
Okay, so as Chris said, thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me here. As Chris said, I come from the learning sciences. In fact, I'm one of the founders of the field called the learning sciences. And the learning sciences is a field that is focused on understanding the ways that different learning theories go together with each other, the roles that the things that different learning theories emphasize, the roles each of them play, and how they integrate with each other. So I'm talking about cognitive, I'm talking about sociocultural, I'm talking about things that theories that have to do with emotions and attitudes. Nowadays, there's a lot of work going on in kind of historical cultural, looking at things like racism and the way that history has had an effect on people's thinking and learning and doing in the world and their positioning in the world. And the learning sciences seeks to understand how the things that each of those approaches, each of those theories says about learning impacts the ways that people learn. And one of the ways, the most important way that learning scientists study those things is through designing learning experiences and studying those learning experiences as they iteratively make them better over time to understand things about the integration of learning theories that you can't understand unless you're actually looking at learning as it's happening in real world experiences. So I come from that tradition, and I've designed bunches of learning experiences myself. A lot of what I did in the past was for purposes of research, but I've also been involved in designing a middle school science curriculum. It's called Project-Based Inquiry Science, if you want to look it up, 3 years of middle school science, based on what we know about how people learn from experience and integrating into it all kinds of things from cognitive theories and from situated sociocultural theories, constructionist approaches, case-based reasoning approaches, project-based cognitive apprenticeship approach, integrating all of those things together to make it work. And then I designed a master's degree program called Learning Engineering at Boston College, where we have students learn how to design learning experiences that are informed by the learning sciences. where my research background is from. And our focus is on helping those master's students who are going to go out in the world and work in companies that are designing products. They're going to work at school systems, helping teachers integrate new pedagogies and new technologies into what they do. They're going to work at museums. They're going to work in science centers. They're going to work in after-school programs, helping them to learn how to do such design so that the learning experiences that get designed, that are sold as curricula, that are sold embedded in curricula, embedded in technologies, will be engaging for learners and will be impactful in learners' lives, in addition to helping them to learn the things that we want them to learn.
So Jim, tell us about your background and your role.
So I have the privilege of reading a book called Learning Engineering Toolkit. And before that, I had the privilege of being part of a group within the IEEE ICICL, that's the Industry Connections Industry Consortium on Learning Engineering, in defining what learning engineering is. And that is, learning engineering is a process and a practice that applies the learning sciences using human-centered engineering design methodologies and data-informed decision-making to support learners in their development. I currently work for a company called Kolodner Information Partners, and I do work for the U.S. Department of Education and for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, among other things.
Thanks, and Say, tell us about your role in this.
All right, thanks. My voice is a little under the weather right now, so please forgive the audio. Previously, just recently, I was the director of the U.S. government's Advanced Distributed Learning Program. And so that program does the science and technology, policy, and coordination, both nationally and internationally, for distributed learning. Prior to that, I've worked in industry and in academia, and my background is pretty diverse. I like to say that I'm a human systems scientist, which is nicely ambiguous. So it could be anything that you want it to be. But really what that means is whatever group I'm in, they see me as the out group. So when I'm sitting with engineers, they see me as a learning scientist and a soft, squishy, social scientist. When I'm sitting with learning scientists, they see me as the technologist or the data person. But really, I've always tried to bring this systems approach to the way that people and complex technologies work together, with a focus on optimizing human performance. In other words, helping people learn, develop, and then apply those capabilities effectively in operational situations, whatever that might mean. And so I've spent a lot of my career looking at learning, but not just through the narrow lens of how do I optimize this learning experience, but how do I put this into context? How do I get the organizational design so that the incentives are aligned with the training or the education? What technologies do you need to get the right kind of data out so that a month or a year later, you can use that to optimize, or that you can use it immediately to adapt the learning? So I like to say I'm this human systems scientist. Really, I like to bring a big bag of tricks and leverage all of these different pieces to try to optimize the challenge with learning in the center.
So thanks to the three of you. I feel very fortunate to be a colleague with you in this initiative. And I'm going to start with a question that actually draws on one of the principles of learning engineering, which is to start with a goal and work backwards. So let's do a hypothetical. Let's assume that a decade from now, learning engineering has been widely adopted across the entire society. And every form of learning is conducted with the guidance of learning engineering. How would the world be different? What would we see then that we don't see now?
Well, we would see changes in the practice of education and training. It would be done in teams. A lot of times it's a solo sport. It would be done by multidisciplinary teams, and teams that not only understand the depth of their own domain, but also have an understanding of the other disciplines so that they can communicate and not be talking past each other and work productively together.
I think our systems would look very different. And I don't just mean our education and training systems, I mean everything. I think we're already starting to see this to an extent. Training, education, and just in time, like on the job performance support are all kind of meshing together. And instead of there being this kind of systematic or industrial aged approach where people go to school and they stay in school for, 10 years or 16 years or whatever, and then they move on, where it's more assembly line like, I think you're going to see a lot more mass customization enabled by technology that's using data to tailor to individuals. And so you're going to see a lot of different trajectories across life where learning is enabling people to do what they want to do, whether that be for a career or a hobby or just life experiences. And to borrow a little bit of what Chris always says, I do agree that we're going to see the 60-year curriculum where people change jobs and careers frequently across their lives because they're enabled and they're kind of buttressed by these technology-enabled learning systems.
And I want to add some things. Say and I disagree somewhat about technology and how big a role it could and should play. I think that there's a real danger in having technology play too big a role in school itself. Okay, the things I think that what she's talking about is what is going to allow grown-ups to continue to learn through a lifetime. But there's a really big need when people are learning to have to be interacting with people who understand them, interacting with people who are going to pat them on the back, interacting with people who are going to help them to make their ideas more robust, more correct, I don't think I want to use the word correct, but help them make their ideas more sophisticated, help them grow. There's a lot that's important in learning and supporting learning that goes beyond that has to do with people interacting with people. Okay, so but there's a lot that Say and I agree about. So I think that I want to say that I would like to think. First of all, I would like to think we can do this in 10 years, but I'm not optimistic about it because I think that I think that conceptions of what learning is have to be, and how learning happens, have to be broadened quite a bit before we can do this. I think there has to be much more respect for what people who know learning, who know how learning works, know, and much more humility among people who know learning about how much they actually know, okay, before we can make all these wonderful things happen. But I'd like to see school as being a place that children want to go to, because they're getting to look at issues and be playful, right, in ways that doing things that are of interest to them, learning math that's important to learn in ways that are interesting to them and that address ways that they need to thrive in the world, address the kinds of things they need to thrive in the world. That school is not just a place to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, but it's a place that really helps children grow as people and learn the kinds of things that they need to learn to thrive as good citizens, good participatory citizens. So I'm hoping that these groups that Jim is talking about, these interdisciplinary groups that Jim is talking about, And these technologies that SAY is talking about are going to be integrated in school anyway, in ways that achieve those goals for our children and our future.
And if I can be bold enough to also answer a bit of my own question, whether or not students feel that they're experiencing technology guiding their learning, there will be technology at the back end because there'll be huge amounts of data collected, and that data will be analyzed in sophisticated ways and used to personalize learning. I think if we really did learning engineering at scale, we would have something that's actually opposite to what we have now. What we have now is that every learner is getting more or less the same thing. And what we would have in the future with learning engineering would be that every learner is getting something custom for them. And when they collaborate, they are bringing different perspectives, not only because they are different people, but also because they're kind of learning things in a different way.
And I want to say something about what personalized means, because a lot of people think that what personalized means is that you have people in front of a computer and everybody's getting different kind of help to do whatever it is that they're doing, personalized to the prior knowledge they bring and the mistakes that they're making. That's not what Chris means by personalized. And I don't think it's what any of us are thinking about in terms of personalized. I said before that I would like to see children learning math, say, okay, by using it to do some things that are interesting to them. So I can imagine that there's some children who are really interested in things related to architecture. They don't know that it's called architecture, building things with blocks and Legos and whatever, and others who are interested in drawing, and others who are interested in, I don't know, getting rockets in the air, lots of different things that kids are interested in, and they get some are interested in animals, okay, and they at Subways, they get a chance to learn math in a context that is exciting to them.
What I really hear you say is making sure that there's a humanistic element and that we don't forget about all of the many things that happen within a learning situation, especially for K-12 or for children, beyond just the conveyance of like knowledge or skills, but really getting into the broader range.
So Kurt, I want to let you and Yang ask some questions and join the dialogue.
Okay.
Well, we've all been on the same kind of journey for a few decades now. And when you're on the same kind of journey, you meet some of the same people. And, I talked to Say before this, and she mentioned that the person who had the job at ADL Lab was my former boss, Dr. Bob Wisher, so I'm sure you struck up many similar conversations that I had when you were working at ADL. And Janet, you have a person at Boston College who's my former student, Michael Barnett, and you probably know another former student, John Savory, who worked with Tom Duffy to help create the PBL journal, and others.
I don't know him, but that would be, he's somebody probably I should know. Yeah.
Yeah. Savory and Duffy.
I know Tom.
Yeah. Well, let's just say Tom and I didn't end up on the best terms in the end, but and that's part of the reason I left Ed Psych and was kicked out by the learning science people, and I'm now in IST. But that's another story for another day. But we've all been looking at learning in different ways, shapes, and forms, and it's good to have you guys on the show just to talk about these different topics. But I'm not going to ask my question. I'm going to ask an audience question over in YouTube. Lydia Cow is one of our regular listeners, watchers, viewers, and she's wondering, she says it's a fantastic panel, and I totally agree with her. She says, I'm wondering how you, and by the way, also Janet, I worked with Sasha as well for a while,
right,
before he left IU and went to ASU. I'm wondering how you distinguish learning engineering from learning design. Does anyone want to take that on, the difference between learning engineering and learning design? Or Any other words or terms that might be confusing to folks? You might want to take a stab at clarifying them.
Say, I think you should go first.
Well, I was going to actually say Jim, but maybe I'll just steal Jim's story.
Okay.
Or Jim, do you want to tell the story with me about
Sure.
the
We can
penicillin
tell-
story? Go ahead, and then
Yeah.
I'll come in at the end.
So in 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. That was a great scientific breakthrough. But the problem was, over a decade later, the scientists hadn't figured out how to produce the drug at scale. And this was a real problem because World War II was going on. So there was a real need for penicillin. So they called on engineers, chemical engineers. And the chemical engineers came up with a process called deep tank fermentation. At the beginning of the war, there wasn't enough penicillin for even one patient. And by the end of the war, there were millions, hundreds of millions of dosage available. And it's credited with helping to win the war. So it's a victory for both science and engineering.
The moral of the story here is that science tells us things about the world, and engineering helps us to scale solutions and create reliable processes using science as one of the tools. And so the difference between learning engineering and learning science, and I'll get to the actual question on learning design here in a minute, is that it's about taking learning science, but then looking even more broadly, looking at what the organizational goal is for the learning activity, and then thinking about all the pieces and parts, whether it be the things that are obvious, like the pedagogy, the technology, the data, or the things that are maybe less obvious, like the classroom design or the organizational incentives, or the way that things are enabled across the whole system. Learning design, that's just the act of doing it, right? And I would argue that some learning designers probably do this effectively nowadays. But I think also a lot of times more traditional, like instructional design methodologies, tend to be a little bit more linear and reductive, a little bit more focused on breaking things into terminal and enabling learning objectives, and really focused on making the right curriculum for that experience without necessarily looking as broadly, without necessarily integrating the data focus, and without necessarily having that continuous improvement cycle that learning engineering emphasizes, which is all about continuously updating your learning activity through data across its life cycle.
And I would say one other thing, and that is that in the best of all worlds, learning engineering learning engineers in doing design consider many different learning theories and approaches, pedagogical approaches as they're doing their designs. I think that instructional design is definitely more limited than that. I think that learning design tends, I think, to be more limited as well. In the
Janet with the hot takes here.
What?
With the hot takes here.
You want to argue with me?
No. Actually, I don't.
I'm not going to say learning engineering is there right now. My role in learning engineering, role in the learning engineering community is to take it there. Okay, that's Jim will tell you that's what I do. That's why I'm there.
Yeah, and I would add that learning engineering is much broader. So design is focused usually on developing content for learning experiences, where learning engineering, things that are beyond instructional designers, like what are all factors that prevent someone from being able to learn something?
Jim,
even getting kids to school.
Jim, you're going to have to repeat that. You were going in and out.
Yeah. So engineering is concerned with all of the factors that can help or hurt learning. And that is things other than just learning experiences. We have a story in the learning engineering toolkit about getting to school. And that was a learning engineering problem.
Yeah. And there's one other thing that I wanted to say. I think that that there are people, I don't know if there's anybody out there in the learning sciences who's listening to this, But I think that people in learning sciences for sure are designing learning experiences. But they're designing learning experiences for the purpose of, for purposes of doing research. And that doesn't necessarily lead to the design of experiences that can actually be used and adapted widely in the world. It sometimes does. And I think when it does lead that way, people have been starting companies or, bringing the kinds of, they basically started doing learning engineering, bringing a lot of the kinds of other people who are needed to make that happen into their labs to do that.
Jan,
Chris
Yeah,
is one of those people.
So anyway, I was feeling bad that Kurt was kicked out of learning sciences. So today, Kurt, you are dealing with the next level of learning science. You're dealing with the learning engineers. So you should be very happy. Okay, but I was just telling Chris before the show started, I actually have not heard learning engineering. I think I know a lot of things in education. So you guys have a good opportunity to develop, to recruit a new person into learning engineering. But I'm really interested in when, like, for example, Jim gave a very high level definition of what learning engineering is, right? You give, and at the same time, Janet was objecting to SAY's proposal of too much technology in schools. I think Janet's take a very humanistic approach to education, which I appreciate. So what I'm really, I don't even know what my question is because I don't know what learning engineering is. So could any of you use an example to describe what learning engineering is? Even your answer to question, to Lydia's house question, I don't feel like I know enough. Maybe give an example. How do you can you education engineering, school engineering, are there general principles? You were talking about the penicillin, when Jim was talking about that example, but I'm just really curious, are there like 5 principles? I'm sure you wrote that in your toolkit, in your book. Some of those things, just something more specific would be very helpful.
I'm going to give you an example of something that one of my students is working on right now. And it's not fully, the student is not working with a big multidisciplinary group of people. She's kind of had to do all of the multidisciplinary stuff herself and with the perspectives of the people around her and bring people in as, to get advice. But I have a student who's designing a game. She's designing a game for gamers to help them appreciate the natural world and especially the coastal ecosystems with coral reefs and sharks and fish, and the ways that the things that we do when we live our lives affect those. And her goal is that she wants people to love nature, okay, love these ocean ecosystems and want to live their lives and advocate for policies that will keep them alive, okay? And she wants them to know enough about these ecosystems to, be able to effectively do that. And she has gone through, I don't know how many iterations of design right now, okay, to create this game. And there's a lot of different learning theory that she's brought into it. So, and a lot of different disciplines she's brought into it. So one of the things that she had to do was to learn the ecosystem content. Okay, and she did a lot of reading and she talked to a lot of specialists to learn what affects ecosystems so she could get the content into it. Another thing that she had to do was to learn how to make people fall in love with it. Okay. What do we know about making people fall in love with the natural world? Well, there's no research on what do we need to make people fall in love with the natural world. But what she did was she started with her understanding of, actually, there's an understanding of awe, right? It has to do with experiencing things that are bigger than we are, okay? And awe leading to this kind of really emotional surprise, right? Leading us to appreciation, okay? And so she figured out how she could bring awe to this. And one of the ways is through the beauty of the things that are in this design, okay? And another is through making the gameplay such that people become surprised by things that go wrong and surprised by things that go right in awe-inducing ways. And come to understand things with all of the come to experience a lot of different ways that things can go right and wrong in a ecosystem, okay, and the ways that what we do and the policies we have can make a difference in doing that. So she got the cognitive in there, she got the emotional in there, and the people are playing together and they're having discussions along the way. And she figured out ways of making the gameplay work so that they need to have the discussions that lead to the sense making, that lead to the learning. So it's a lot of integration of a lot of different things. She's tested it with gamers and she's tested it with people who know ecosystems. And she has all of our faculty who each know different things about learning.
But Janet, I still don't see how unique that makes learning engineering, because any games we design, any learning we design, I used to lead the US Department of Education's video game design, working with China on language learning game. We all go through all of those, what you described.
Yes.
So, but what's the engineering that brings this, makes this unique?
Engineering has two parts to it, I think, that are important there. One of them is that there's this systematic iteration process, okay, that involves knowing the people you're designing for, in fact, bringing them into design with you sometimes, okay? So knowing the instances in which it's going to be used, the environments in which it's going to be used, and taking that into account and the content and all kinds of other things, and then taking this iterative approach to getting to solutions. And the other part of it is being informed in doing that by theory. And I think that the extent of the theory that's used to inform it, okay, goes way beyond what anybody has done with game design. I think there's a lot of what mostly has been done with any kind of design for learning. Okay, the extent.
I would add a few more to what Janet has said. So in addition to the iterative design, and I actually like to say for the iterative design, it's not even just during the development phase, it extends into the full deployment. It's
Right.
like for the technical folks out there, it's like DevOps, except for learning. So you're continuously improving it. It's not a one and done. I would say in addition to that, it's being data driven. And of course, we already say we're data driven in the way that we do traditional education and training, but to a much higher extent being data driven. Ideally, where applicable, not always applicable, but where applicable, we would want to be able to get like real-time data and be able to collect data so that it's aggregated over time to both improve that person's learning experience, but as also to inform that continuous improvement. integrating human-centered design throughout the system is also essential. And I know Janet already mentioned, having that human-centric design, but I also mean extending that beyond just the pedagogy or the andragogy or the hugegogy, whatever you want to say, right? Extending beyond that into the UI and UX, the user interface, the user experience, really thinking holistically about those elements. Using these learning activities to reach a goal. And in Janet's example, there was a really clear goal about this, changing people's attitudes about marine life. And a lot of times in learning situations, we tend to forget that there's like a distal goal, and we get focused on my goal is to deliver these training objectives. Well, no, your goal is for this person to be able to perform those actions or have this, change in long-term memory that, evokes some different behavior downstream, right? And so really focusing on those. And then I would say most of all, throughout all of these pieces, it's the idea, and that we didn't say this out loud because I think that Janet, Jim, and I would say probably Chris too, we all just feel this so inherently that we don't even say it out loud, but it's the idea of having an intertwined lifelong learning journey, where all of the pieces across your life are building together in a coherent, intentional system. And ideally, sometime in the future, we'll be able to make those interconnections so that it's not just, you go to class A and you go to class B and you go to class C, but rather they are enmeshed into that experience. And on the flip side, the people who are making that experience, your data engineer, your learning scientist, your instructional designer, your graphic designer, they're all working as a team with a shared goal. Unlike now, where a lot of times, the instructional designers maybe are in a room with sticky notes, figuring out what they're doing, where the software engineers are down in the basement with their Mountain Dew, doing the software, right? And everybody is working more like a factory next to each other, but not intertwined towards the same goal. And I think those differences really do make it unique compared to like a traditional instructional design or a traditional just application of learning science.
I want to build on Jim's penicillin analogy, because actually the pandemic created a big learning engineering opportunity, because there were a few people doing high quality online learning, but it was a scarce resource, and in many ways it was kind of a home brewed operation, not designed for scale. And now we have the challenge of creating both a technical infrastructure and a human infrastructure and a whole set of other things. I mean, we could spend the rest of the show enumerating everything that was needed. And as a case study of perhaps I'll say naive learning engineering, there were a lot of things that weren't done well, but that could have been done well. I mean, if everybody involved had understood learning engineering, there would have been an opportunity to get to quality online learning at scale much faster than, and much more equitably than actually occurred.
Yeah, and it would not have exactly the way that Coursera and MIT X, whatever it is, whatever those MOOCs are, it would be quite different.
Yeah,
I think, in a lot of ways.
Kurt, did you have another question?
Yeah, I'll jump in here and just mention another overlap probably with Janet. One of my main advisors at Wisconsin was Rich Laird, who you probably know very well, went off to Vanderbilt after that.
I know him very well.
Yeah. So, you've listed resources, Chris, in the blog post for this session, and they're really good ones. They're top notch. They're your book, Learning Engineering for Online Education. They're Janet's toolkit, Learning Engineering Toolkit. They're, Jim's.
Jim was the originator of the toolkit. I'm second in line.
Right. And Jim's on the next one, Learning Engineering at a Glance, and so on and so forth. This morning, I was interviewing some language learning experts who are using ChatGPT to teach languages, and we found about 140 of those individuals that were YouTubers teaching about language learning utilizing generative AI. My question is not about generative AI. My question is more about the people who are listening to the show later. We have some people who are utilizing this show within their graduate courses in educational technology. What I'd like for you three to talk about is, what resources do you utilize outside the mainstream books that are here that you listed? And we could also list How People Learn book part 2, learners, contexts, and cultures. But what else exists beyond these things that are, we always say, oh, you can buy my book or whatever, and those, they're great. But do you have a favorite podcast show? Do you have a favorite YouTube channel? Do you utilize, is there a particular website that's a good, excellent resource for finding out more about learning engineering that you might mention for the young people? I'm thinking about the young graduate students who are watching, like Lydia, who are watching this show and want to know more. So would any of you like to jump in and discuss any of your favorites or beyond?
Well, I would say join the Icicle group. Yeah. I'm stealing Jim's thunder because I think he's probably going to say the same thing. The Icicle Learning Engineering group is very active. There are grad students in it. There are professionals. There are academics. There's a whole wide range of folks. And we have a Discord channel. So for the folks who are maybe a bit younger and are very involved with technology, you can hop on there, and it's pretty active too.
And one of the special interest groups we have is for graduate students and newbies to learning engineering. And I'm the faculty I'm the senior advisor to that. Actually, one of the students Lauren Totino, who graduated from my program 3 years ago, is leading it up. And we talk about things that people are working on and give people advice, and we talk about issues, and we've brought in other senior people to talk about what learning engineering is, and we're just really trying to help people to newbies to learn about it. So I think it's definitely worth looking into that.
I would say,
yeah, go on.
Sorry to jump in. So it's a great opportunity for graduate students, because the graduate students are right in the mix with some of the veterans from the group, co-authoring papers and finding next opportunities. As Janet said, one of our students ended up getting a job through those connections.
And I think that when you're starting your career, you're better off in an emerging field than a mature field, where you just can get lost and you feel like you're climbing an endless ladder to try to get to the level of people who've been working in the same field for 10 or 20 or 30 years. And that Icicle is an emerging field because it's contested. That's what happens with emerging field. So the instructional designers say, well, this is just instructional design. We've been doing this forever. The learning scientists say, well, this is just learning science. We've been doing it forever. Probably there are development people who say, oh, this is just development for scale. We've been doing it forever. But the point is that what they've had is one piece of a jigsaw puzzle, and Icicle and similar champions are trying to put the puzzle together so that you can actually see the picture on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Jim. Say was asking, did we convince you? I don't need to be convinced. I accept. I'm like a learning sciences. I accept anything. If I cannot, I just create a new term for it. So the
That's like a true academic.
I know that's why we work together. So I actually do have a follow-up question. I know we're running out of time every time. Can you give us an estimate right now, anyone, how big is the circle of convinced? How many learning engineers are there? Because again, I really pride myself as reading a lot and knowing a lot. And I've known Chris for a long time. I have not heard this term officially as actually a brand of a profession, in many ways. So I'm really I feel ashamed, but anyway, but at the same time, I just don't know how big the circle is,
Well,
so
let me
you can
just
enjoy
it's getting bigger. It's getting bigger and bigger every day. and it crosses all domains of learning. So it's growing in from K-12, post-secondary, corporate, and military learning, and the things that are happening, like Khan Academy doing Khan Mingo, a kind of a personal tutor for every student and a personal assistant for every teacher. That's learning engineering, because Khan has a team of multidisciplinary experts, and they're working together, not as a waterfall process, handing it off from one to the next. They're working together to solve those problems. And so it's only going to grow. The acceleration of growth is starting to happen right now.
So Chris, I don't know if you remember, we had a guest from Western Governors University and National University, and they were launching master's programs in learning experience design. Do you remember that? So I was commenting about them as the Imagineers at Disneyland. They were building, in those places. So I was wondering, Janet, in your master's program in learning engineering at Boston College, are there any connections, or is this just
I don't have any connections to them, but I also tell my students that they're Imagineers. And we were going to call the program Learning Experience Design, and then before Icicle we started it like a year after Icicle came into being, so we called it Learning Engineering. And there's some people who are not happy with that name. It might get turned back into Learning Engineering Design. I'm saying Learning Experience Design, but no, we're not in touch with them. I don't.
So Janet, do you want to start another journal called Learning Engineering?
No, I'm not starting another journal. I'm too close to retirement. Not the next generation needs.
Well, maybe say, and Jim, you can start a new journal.
But I have to tell you that it's not an academic discipline right now. Okay, what it is it's not an academic discipline right now. It's a practice, and there's not research in learning engineering right now. There's figuring out what learning engineering is. And I think that it may very well become an academic discipline, a discipline like other engineering disciplines that's figuring out how to carry out these practices, right? And I mean, we're trying to do some things with that right now. We're trying to do some things with reusable and adaptable design patterns, but we're right at the beginning of that. Actually, Chris is involved in that also, in the little group I put together. And it's right now practice. So I don't know. I don't know a journal, a magazine. I mean, yeah, we need to certainly be sharing experiences. And I was
just wondering, just because it's just so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And I won't learn more. So I'll read some of the books, but it's just fascinating to think about. Another thing I think was that when you mentioned K-12, I was just wondering how learning engineering applies to younger kids, or is it primarily driven by adult learning and training?
Well, actually,
it's a process and a practice. So it can create experiences for any level, and it also is a branch of engineering that is just being developed. So other branches of engineering have things like reusable components, and as Janet mentioned, design patterns. Software engineers use design patterns all the time. And actually, I should turn it over to Chris. I'll turn it over to Chris to kind of complete that thought, because he has some great ideas about this.
Well, I happen to know something about Sesame Street because one of my colleagues, Joe Blatt, was one of the original team decades ago that came up with Sesame Street. That is one of the few examples, I think, of a case study in learning engineering, because they began with a very multidisciplinary team to try to do something that nobody thought they could accomplish, and that in fact a lot of people did not want them to accomplish, and And they have ended up doing it at scale and across different countries and across different languages. And I think if we were to go back, that could be taught as a case in a learning engineering course. Say, I suspect that there are things in DoD that could be taught as a case study of learning engineering. And actually, I think Imagineers are a wonderful example of entertainment engineering. So it's the kind of the engagement part of learning without necessarily any academic or useful learning connected with it. So we sort of have to surround the elephant, I think, with cases, Young, and then it'll be easier to see just what the elephant is.
Yeah, and I think that I said that I had created this middle school science curriculum. I mean, I think that really was a learning engineering endeavor before there was such a thing as learning engineering, not as far back as Sesame Street, right? But it was another learning engineering endeavor, and I think that there are. I think that a lot of the work that Mitchell Resnick has done, like with computer clubhouses and with Scratch, are learning engineering endeavors, and some things that Ori Walensky is doing with has done with NetLogo. So what Chris's group at Harvard has done with the whole set of Ecomove and its descendants, and making those work in the world. I mean, I think that there are a lot of case studies that we could have, and a lot of them that are about school.
So Kurt, do you want to ask one more question here? I want to make sure that everybody gets a shot at.
We just have Jim's question on the side, but I think Say wanted to say something. I can ask Jim's question after Say goes.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that learning engineering is the natural result at the complexity that we're facing across the world. So the pace of the world feels like it's accelerating. The expectations for people to be able to perform their job and their next job and their next job are increasing. And we have all of this new technology. And then how do we get our arms around it as learning professionals? And I think, infusing these ideas of like systems engineering and DevOps and data-driven design into a learning process is just naturally the way that we're going to get our arms around this complexity of the world, and also be able to optimize the system that we're working on to produce folks who can also navigate that complexity. And then I see in the chat, do you want to ask the question, Kurt?
Yeah, so Jim Burnett's joined us in the live stream over on YouTube, and he's interested in the project. And he says, what is the game platformer simulation? I guess Janet's got an answer for him.
Well, right now it's a board game. And it doesn't, it exists as an amazing student project. It exists as an amazing student project. The name of the student working on is Marie Tagel. She's also looking at simulation to go with it that it's not clear how that's all integrated yet. But we would love to find people who, or somebody or some company that, knows how to make a game idea into a product and actually make that happen.
So we're running out of time. What I'd like to do is to invite each of you to take 1 minute and recognize that there's going to be people who are not watching this live stream, but who are going to be watching the video. And what advice would you give to them if they say, gee, maybe this is something that I'd like to get involved in? What advice would you give to them?
Could I go first? Because unfortunately, I'm calling via phone and my battery might die. So I would say it's a mindset change. It's thinking in terms of multidisciplinary teams. It's using engineering concepts like engineering control theory, and it's thinking outside of the whatever box you're in now, and thinking what's possible to help learners, whatever that might be. And to answer Yong's question, what are the ingredients? for learning engineering? Well, it's the process and practice. It's the learning sciences, human-centered engineering, using engineering principles and design patterns and components, and then data, and using two parts of data: the instrumenting of data, so how you collect it, and then how you analyze it and feed it back to the learner and everyone that is supporting the learners.
And using what we know about learning to figure out what data needs to be collected.
In the learning sciences, yes.
Did you have more to say, Jim?
Oh, that was it. And I can't believe I forgot the learning sciences in that list. But the definition of learning engineering, according to Icicle at IEEE-icicle.org, you can find the official definition that has all the.
So I want to say that, I think that answering Chris's question, I should say two things. One of them is that you should join Icicle and join some of its special interest groups. Come to our conference, which is coming up in July. Go to the Icicle website, IEEE-ICICLE.org. And the other thing is that if you want to go to school, I know a really good master's program at Boston College. If you're more interested in the data part of things than in the design part of things, I know another good one at CMU, and a third one at Stanford.
And ASU has a brand new program as well.
I guess I get the final thoughts here on what you should do. Well, I agree with everything that Janet and Jim said. So I would just add that it's really important to understand all of the things that feed into a learning experience. So study learning sciences, study instructional design, but also study instructional technologies and learning analytics, as Janet and Jim said, and all of the different data standards that are necessary to make a learning ecosystem, and organizational design, organizational learning. Basically, be hungry for looking across disciplines and then looking for those opportunities to go outside of a swim lane and bridge across those different academic disciplines to really get the best out of all of them.
And if you're worried that that's too many disciplines, be in touch with some of us to talk about how you make sure that you narrow it in the right ways. Okay, so that you stay wide enough for your interests to really do something good, and you don't get overwhelmed by everything that's out there.
Well, I want to thank all three of you. I know how busy you are. And I really wanted to do this show and to have you involved, because I think this is where it's happening in education now. I have been around long enough to be in at the ground floor when ed tech started to go to scale, once we had the microcomputer. And I remember what it was like in those early days. I wasn't directly involved in the evolution of cognitive science, but there was a time, when cognitive science was this strange, new, weird field. Howard Gardner even wrote a book about it.
I was there.
You were there, yeah. And you remember what it was like. It was very heady and exciting to have a couple hundred people who were trying to change the world. Learning engineering is at that point now, and it doesn't take a lot of time to get right into the middle of it, because it's not a mature field, and it doesn't take years and years to get to where the edge of it is. The edge of it is pretty close. So please do follow up if you found this a program of interest. So I want to just talk about next week. Next week, we're back to noon, or is it 11? Well, look at the website to see if it's midday. And we're going to look at the Dominican Republic, which is a small country in the Caribbean that is doing really interesting things with educational innovation in a global South setting with limited resources. So I hope you'll come and join us with that. Thanks again for being part of this episode.